You cannot trust medical advice from medical professionals. That doesn't mean that you don't have a great doctor that you should listen to, but
we are talking about doing your own research. While we got the good old RFK Jr., which in my opinion is an absolute dumpster fire, he brings up a point that we need to talk about, which is this idea of doing your own research and being your biggest champion of your health. And more importantly, this very disingenuous and dangerous narrative, which is you shouldn't trust your doctor. It's a really weird place we're living in when one of the highest positions of health is putting on this narrative of don't trust your doctor. While constructive skepticism has its place, that is not the narrative coming out of RFK Jr. And so I want to get your perspective on Vitals Check and looking into that.
So we are here for Vitals and Values podcast, and we're going to dive right on in. And as you said, skepticism is healthy. It has its place. But my thought too is if you're not trusting medical professionals, who are you trusting? Yeah. You got to trust somebody. You're trusting your inner self. You have the answers to everything.
I just feel like based upon how I feel that I just know how to diagnose lipolymphedema based upon how I feel.
How I feel. There's a lot of feelings out there these days.
I feel like I have hypothyroidism. Well, your blood work says otherwise.
You can't tell me
how I feel.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all that kind of stuff. But we know from research that false stories spread faster than true ones. Mm-hmm. So there is research to support that there was a large study that looked at false stories on Twitter and I think some other platforms that found that falsehoods really reach other people more quickly than truth.
Well, because it's like kind of just breaking down that even more to detail. This narrative of, okay, doing your own research, following some random person on TikTok or Instagram or Googling something is not doing your own research. I'm going to break that down a little bit here, but like the amount of people that convey this idea that, well, I did my research, and you ask them what their definition of research is well, I follow this doctor on TikTok.
Sure. And I think people don't realize that research is a very specific thing, and there is a specific way to do it. You can't just decide that something you read is doing research, as you have stated. Did you want to expand on that, you said?
Well, I mean, just that whole idea of like, as we kind of unpack doing your own research, I'm a huge advocate for doing that. As we kind of unpack this episode, 10 years down my weight loss, and obviously going to school for biomed and this whole bit, I have been duped by diet culture and gimmicks enough times. And my general character and everything, if I found out I'm wrong on something, like I take that personal. Like I'm just sitting there going, I was conveying something to other people trusted me and I was wrong. And it is weird to me how and a lot of that came down to blind faith in other people. And so I'm a huge advocate of quote unquote doing your own research. Like everything I've done last decade of learning how to read and interpret clinical research, randomized controlled trials versus systemic reviews versus meta-analyses versus cohort epidemiologic studies versus in vitro petri dish studies versus all of these different things. I wanted to empower myself enough to know that I could actually do my own research based upon learning how to actually read clinical research. And the problem is most people believe that by Googling something, by reading an article of something, that they've done their research. And as we unpack the Dunning-Kruger effect, you'll find out, very importantly, when it comes to if you have to take advice from somebody, how do you interpret who's probably giving the most objective, realistic advice coming later in this episode, which is super important.
And I know for myself, so I have a bachelor's degree in biology. I have a master's degree in basic medical science, and I have a medical degree. And I question everything I read and where the research is coming from. And that's with the background of all of that science that I still say, I don't know. I need to kind of look into this further. I don't like to take anything at face value. And I question my own interpretation of research because I'm not a scientist who's constantly looking at research, and most people aren't. And so you aren't going to just know how to do research without practicing it and learning it and understanding it fully. And I don't think most people understand that.
No. And then as we kind of like, 'cause going off of the first main point, which is so true, it's wild to me that, I mean, it's undeniable, fear-based, sensationalized information goes at extremely faster paces through the internet than objectively and factually correct information does. And so, point blank in the beginning, if this information you are getting research from comes from social media, immediate yellow flag. Because it's just as we know, fear and sensationalized, factually wrong information moves and propagates to the internet so much faster. So, number one, be careful on calling a TikTok clip or an Instagram clip research. But a guy in a white coat said it, so it must be true.
Negative. And then moving on to another piece of data in this topic is that repetition warps truth. So there's this illusionary truth effect that shows that repeated claims feel truer. So the more you hear this thing over and over and over again on social media, regardless of the truth of it, it starts to feel true.
Great example of that. And it's crazy because literally RFK Jr. is doing it. He has stated it multiple times, which is factually untrue, but the general consensus of the internet keeps believing it to be true, is doctors are somehow getting paid exorbitant amounts of money to prescribe medications and vaccines or whatever, and it's just not, it's illegal. Like yes, there's this whole there's a small group of people that are getting paid to do speaking engagements. That is technically true, but your general clinician that is actually the one seeing patients on a day-to-day basis, who are actually the ones prescribing medications, it is illegal to get kickbacks in cash, or what people assume to be cash. You can't. We did this in a previous episode. You can get toaster strudels. You can get some
Can't
delicious
get some
cookies,
food.
but that's it. And somehow even RFK Jr. still insinuates this idea of financial incentive, which is just not true. And but since it gets propagated in the internet again and again and again and again and again, people, oh, it must be true. I've heard it like 77 times.
But then if all the doctors on social media pushing back on that, no one seems to care.
Nope. But because the general consensus is it's being said again and again and again, people assume, since it's said often, it must be true.
And what do you think it's like the first thing that gets out there is the thing that takes off? I don't know. How does one thing get so ingrained in people's
It's
minds?
weird. Well, again, it's just preconceived biases. Because, obviously, you can play into the narrative, which is doctors make a good income compared to the average. And now, preface that, for example, doctors also work huge hours.
They have huge loans.
Huge, but my whole thing there is, my dad did this back in the day.
Yeah.
If plumbers, based upon their hourly rate of doing their job, worked 70-hour weeks like a lot of doctors do, they'd make more than most doctors.
That's fascinating.
Which is fascinating, but because their hourly rate is just so friggin' exorbitant. But they work 40-hour weeks, maybe 50, not 70 like doctors. And so it is funny. Like they go, well, since doctors make a bunch of money, they must be doing certain things where they're getting kickbacks in certain capacities. That's my angle at it with the assumption.
And that's just a bad argument anyway. That's not really an argument.
Yeah, but
And then another piece of data or information is that, and I think this is so true, and it's very interesting, that experts are checking sources differently than the general population. And I know I do this. I think you can look at it as that professionals are doing what we call lateral reading. So when they see something, a claim, a statistic, they go, I'm going to look elsewhere. And you look laterally to different sources to verify what you're reading and seeing to confirm that it's true. You don't just take that one source and go, yep, good to go.
Well, and it's like it's super important like that as we break that all down, it plays really big into how we're gonna break down doing your own research and how do you do it in a well-established way that creates constructive outcomes versus just bias, destructive behaviors. But number one, when you break that all down, you don't blindly, I do understand this, you don't blindly follow anybody. You go, hey, back up what you're saying with evidence. Now, if you're going to play that card and you're going to then get mad at somebody for the evidence they provide and you don't have the ability to know the difference of what evidence is, this is what tends to happen with so many of my friends when I tend to lean more towards balance and hey, not fear based and not falling for what's called the appeal to nature fallacy and these different things. And so it's like when I have a discussion with somebody and they go ask me where the evidence is, and I provide a study design, and it's like here's a randomized controlled trial, here's a meta-analysis, here's a systematic review on the subject, and they don't like the outcome, they just say, well, I don't agree with it, and they don't have anything to come back to. But then they go and say, well, I have this one doctor I follow, and it's like, if you're just following one person, that is a concern. But it's so funny because this is a bias, but the people that tend to play the argument of I do my own research usually are the ones blindly following specific doctors or whatever. And when they provide study designs of what they're doing, it's like, oh, I remember somebody I knew gave me an explanation on raw milk and why it's better. And it was a study done in like 1930 on vitamin and minerals. And I'm like, that's not a concern that you're taking a study from almost 100 years ago as your validation on why you're doing like what?
We build on research over time, and I think if you have any training in research, you will know that we're not looking to studies from 100 years ago.
And you're not looking at singular studies. You're looking when you break down vitals and like replication and diversification of information is essential, like what we were just talking about with the expert check on lateral reading. Okay, as we break this all down, if you're looking to do your own research, you want to look at as many different types of study designs as possible to reinforce the strength of the knowledge we know. And what often happens is someone finds one study and they just lean on it. And that's all I talk about is one study, especially like a one single cohort study or one single whatever randomized control trial. And then they think that as fact because they've never even attempted to see if more crazy enough. There are literally scientists out there. We talked about this in the car. If you want, one of the hardest places to live in is being truly scientific because constructive criticism and being challenged is the fundamental rhetoric of science. And from like an RFK Jr. standpoint of challenging things, totally, there is a narrative. That's the hard part about this is there is a narrative he portrays that isn't wrong.
Like it's okay to challenge.
It's okay to challenge. The problem is the same people that are challenging have Dunning-Kruger effect, and they fall for these narratives that have no data to back them, and they're just seeking out bias support, not looking for actual truth.
I think that my thought is that there's a couple of reasons that people do not do the research that they should. I mean, one is they just don't know they're supposed to. Another is it's a lot more work to do that kind of research. It takes a lot more time. And I do think some people, maybe they don't even realize it, but are looking for a specific narrative. And once they find something that supports that, they're not going to look further because like, yep, that's what I want. That's what I wanted to hear. And then they stick with it.
Yep. That goes into the final point before we kind of get some context and nuance here. It's just, again, people have massive blind spots in like do your own research. They have their preconceived biases of the appeal to nature fallacy, meaning that if something is natural, it's inherently better, and if something is artificial, it's inherently damaging. It's just not true. And they have a conspiratorial nature where they don't trust the government, which is fine, but simultaneously trust some random dude on the internet who is making money selling them not this pharmaceutical drug, but this CoQ10 enzyme 7. And it's like, he's making money off of you. That's fine. But they can't make money off of you.
Yeah, for some reason, whoever is making the CoQ10 is better than the pharmaceutical company.
And
Which
I would
really
just be
doesn't make
like,
sense.
and I've had some really tough conversations with some friends over the years on that. I'm like, guys, if you're going to play the money card, which is fine, like I think conflict of interest is a very important thing to talk about. Picking and choosing where conflict of interest is okay and where it's not is an issue. And it's like I'm always like, hey, pharmaceuticals, all this kind of stuff. I get the conflict of interest. You got to be so careful. There are some things that in this realm of trusting the professionals do become an issue, but be consistent with it. And it's like if money is exchanging hands, as long as you question anytime money exchanges hands, fine. Like I get that argument.
You know, it's kind of funny. If you think about what RFK said, he said, question anyone in authority, right?
Yep.
Including what he literally just said.
What he literally
then.
just said.
So and then you're like, oh, now who am I supposed to trust? If you're telling me I'm supposed to be questioning what you just said, essentially. But I don't think people are thinking about it that way.
No, and that's where it's like, well, because he said don't trust me, that it must then whatever he says, it must be true. Because it's like almost like that deflection of like, well, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I'm also going to make some strong claims in future episodes. We're taking another look at some of the claims he makes.
There are plenty others we can talk about.
And so it is so funny how people just try to they try to detach themselves as an expert while alluding to they're making hard claims, but then they hide behind this, well, I'm not an expert, seek medical advice. But then they're like, here's a hard claim. And then back, and it's
But
this
it
constant.
really doesn't make sense if you think about it. It's kind of crazy. Now, and we ran across a method of actually looking through research, which I thought was kind of a good way to do it. So they called it the SIFT method. So SIFT, stop, which I think, yeah, that's important to stop and think about what you're doing. Then investigate the source. Yes, people, investigate the source. It's going to take a little bit of time. Don't just take it at face value. See who is talking. Then find better coverage. That's the F. So see if it's been done elsewhere with how I take that. And then trace the origin and go back to where is this coming from and make sure that it's a reliable source and not some biased money-backed company.
Doing your own research. This is a great one to me. It's like if the source you're getting from is news, immediately the title's clickbait.
Oh, yeah.
And the amount of people that say I did my own research by Googling a subject and they read the title of an article, and then even as you read it, it almost negates the title, but the title was fearing and aggressive enough that it hooked you. And then it's like, well, did you even read the article? And the amount of times I find this fascinating to me where it's like, there was a new one on what's the artificial sweetener that just came out, or it's been out for hold on, we're gonna get this. Aspartame, sucralose. It's actually manufactured in the body. Darn it.
Do you need to look it up a second?
It's gonna drive me nuts.
Right.
Hold on, we're gonna figure this
David's
out.
on his phone. We're going to get answers.
No.
Okay, who out there really only texts with one thumb?
Yes,
I'm just questioning this because I feel like there's a much faster way to use your phone.
I'm feeling judged right now.
I don't know. Everyone,
Fruit.
let us know.
Erythritol.
Yes, what about it?
Erythritol just had a small study done that showed a subtle increase in cardiac events. Now, the whole thing is, and this is what happens, like this one study from this one source, I think it was Cleveland Clinic or something, and it put this very small, subtle increase in stroke risk, and there's a clumping involved of like cells, and so like now you should be really afraid of erythritol. And it's like when you actually break down the study design and then you look at it from different levels and you look at different studies that have been done outside of Cleveland clinics, it's just your actual cardiologist. I remember Dad looking at it and he's just like, I'm not really concerned about it. It's so low hanging fruit in the scheme of things. But again, it popped across everyone's social media 6-8 months ago. It was, this sweetener is causing heart attacks. And it's like, boom, in your face. And then all of a sudden you read the context of the study and you're like, well, maybe it has subtle increase, but probably not too concerning.
And was that one study?
There's one study,
Multiple studies.
not multiple studies, not
Repeatability, people. It's important.
yeah. And so, but then someone Googles it and
Mhm.
says, does erythritol cause heart disease or whatever? And then they see in the article section of Google, erythritol causes heart attacks, blah, blah, blah. And it's like 7 studies by the title, but then you actually read the method of the actual meat of of the article. It kind of always like pulls back on the claim. And then you read the actual study and it's like, well, okay, maybe. But in the scheme of importance, I would say it's extremely low hanging fruit right now. I'd be more concerned of these 11 things that we know
That's so
cause
true.
way more problems than this one
The
thing.
things that we know and are important, people don't seem to actually want to focus on.
No, they want to see that's a bias that people they want to find the gremlin.
Yep.
Instead of like the basics, the meat and potatoes, everyone's trying to find the secret chemical that's in our food, and like that's the bias and lens of the do-it-yourselfers. Is do your own research. Is what biases and angles are you looking at? Like before I share anything, I will constantly make sure I at least find a secondary source outside of my first because I've been duped enough times. And even in my previous book, I'll talk about it. Like when I published my first book six whatever years ago, I got duped into the fat insulin model. And I provided a study and a reference. But the more and more I've looked at different study designs, the more it falls apart. But I found the one study that supported my claim,
Mhm.
and it's like, gosh, I'm not falling for that again. And if you want to get into do your own research, which is fine, I think there's empowerment in it. You have to do it right.
And I think that leads well into the values and focus conversation here. Because one thing I notice in this whole topic is there's not a lot of humility.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is something we need to sit back and think about. Like, if you're like, well, this is the way it is, this one study showed it, you're not going to change my mind. That's a little bit prideful, and like let's have humility that okay, we don't know everything, that we don't know all the research out there, and let's not say everything as such a black and white statement. That's how I feel.
And that's where it's super important on that front when you're taking advice and research from people on the internet. Lane's talked about this,
Lane Norton.
Lane Norton, and other people as well. The people who speak the most certain are usually the ones that have done the least amount of research. Because professionals, people that actually want to know truth, will go based upon the current clinical evidence. This is what we know to be true. It could change. But it's funny because the actual professionals that want to seek actual truth do not go, vaccines cause autism. They do not go, this causes this, unless they have a exorbitant amount of evidence to back their claim. It's based upon what we know thus far in all these different study designs. It's either this is probably what's happening. But it's funny, people on the internet want to listen to the person that has the most confidence. But that's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's like you get just enough information to make yourself feel like you know more than you know. And then as you actually keep learning, you get to this deep deprivation of like,
I know
I
nothing.
know nothing. Like the body is so friggin' complex. The amount of even when you start getting into metabolic pathways and this whole rip, the amount of metabolic pathways that upregulate other ones and downregulate other ones and are redundant to one another, we know nothing. And so when you're listening to people on the internet that do more research than you, and they're just coming off this authority matter of fact, they're probably the ones that are caught
Yeah.
up in the Dunning-Kruger effect.
And I saw this when I went to a lecture at the Van Andel Institute, which is a research institute here in Grand Rapids, and it was a talk by one of the PhD researchers who was studying, I believe it was something like the Mediterranean diet's effect on some specific cancer. I think it was like a lymphoma, and he was showing his research on that topic. And there was questions from the audience at the end, and all these people were asking questions like, how does the Mediterranean diet affect, say, breast cancer or this cancer or that and this? And they were asking questions about certain foods and how they would impact the cancer. And he did a great job saying, hey, I didn't study that. This is what we found. I can't comment on that because that was not a part of her study. And comments like that, which I think is what a real researcher is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to somebody after the fact, and she was frustrated with the talk because he didn't provide these like solid answers to the questions. And I'm like, but that's not what he was researching. So why and how could he make comments on those topics when he was researching a very specific cancer and a very specific diet? And I think people don't understand that. And that's the kind of responses that a true knowledgeable researcher will give.
100%. And it's like, we sit here and at the end of the day, the most educated people are the most humble ones going, hey, we don't know. This is what we know thus far. Now, kind of bringing that together, I always kind of want to explain to people on a 30,000 foot overview. There's nothing wrong with getting into doing your own research. Like we said, there's empowerment there, but there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And number one, coming in humble, going, I don't know most of this. So as I break this all down, this is there are people that have bachelors and masters and PhDs that get duped, that make mistakes. Like, I mean, I can't even tell you how many doctors that I've dealt with over the years that still believe in things that are factually untrue. And then I just come in and say, hey, these 3 studies on very strong levels debunk your claim, and they have no desire to change their bias. So just because you have a credential behind your name doesn't mean they're being intellectually consistent. So it is super important that doing your own research and being your best advocate to specific health topics has its place, but how you do it's very important. So being smart about it, knowing that you have your own biases and own issues, and trying to not fall for the appeal to nature fallacy and all this kind of stuff. So how do you do it from a 30,000 foot lens? Like we talked about before, creating width in your knowledge base and not just depth. The amount of people that will take on one study and they know every dot and number behind it. But the problem with that is you don't look at replication, you don't look at all this kind of stuff. So where is the best place to start with doing your own research? Start at systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Why? Because in general, the people doing those types of studies are trying to find the general consensus.
Because they're taking, well, at least for the meta-analysis, multiple studies.
They're taking multiple studies, and they're taking usually multiple methodologies of studies and systematic reviews, where they're looking at, because I'll kind of break it down a little bit. I don't want to bore people, but like it's super important. There are different types of study designs. So like the best place to start is systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Why? Because they generally take the majority of data on a subject to get a good, sound look at it. That's a great place to start.
And they have this criteria for the studies.
Correct.
That's very specific.
And we're gonna I'm gonna detach from good faith. I'm gonna assume that every article being done is good faith, because I hate to say it, there are some systematic reviews and meta-analyses that I've found that the researcher doing it is like in the carnivore boat or whatever, and they make this meta-analysis, and I'm like, they left out 3 studies on purpose to manipulate people into believing that they're giving good data and they're not. So sadly, there's a lot of even good faith problems even in academia, because that's a big issue. But generally speaking, systematic reviews, meta-analyses is the highest form of constructive outcomes on a subject. Number 2, you can get to randomized control trials, like human randomized controlled, where you have a control group with humans, not rats, not all this kind of stuff, humans. Ideally, the more people in the study, the stronger the study. Like if it's 7 people versus 700 versus 7,000, very different. And so the more people on the study, the higher probability that the information you're getting is accurate and consistent. Number 1, systematic reviews, meta-analyses. Number 2, randomized controlled. 3, you can get into these epidemiologic cohort studies. It's just huge amounts of people, say 200, 300, 400,000 people, and they're usually they're checklist type questionnaire studies or whatever. They're getting huge amounts of data from hospital systems, and it at least gets you a broad stroke of understanding the difference between correlation and causality, but it's cheap. This is why epidemiologic studies have their place, is because they allow for the question of, does drinking Diet Coke increase bicep size? Is there a correlation? Let's just look at, we found data of 50,000 people and how much Diet Coke they were consuming. And we found that these people had, they had how many inches on their bicep, and they were able to correlate that the more Diet Coke someone drank, the bigger their biceps. Okay, that's an epidemiologic study. So we don't have control, but maybe it does correlate. Okay, so now we're like, hey, it correlates. Now you'd have to go into randomized control to see if it actually matters, but at least it creates the opportunity for asking that question to get to an answer. And then finally, the lowest hanging fruit, animal studies and in vitro studies. In vitro is like cells in a petri dish, and animal studies is rats and stuff like this. The reason why those are very low hanging fruit is because we will unethically dose rats and cells that we won't do to humans. This is the number one reason why there's any data that really gets into, and diet, technically there's epidemiologic studies too, but that really show problem with like aspartame and these artificial sugars, is because in vitro studies and in rat studies, they will give the equivalent of 1,000 cans of Diet Coke a day to a rat, and they'll find out 30 days later it gets cancer.
And they're
it's like,
never going to do that in a human.
and it's never going to be dosed in a human.
And you can't assume because something happened in a rat that it's going to cross over and happen in a human.
Exactly. And so if you're doing your own research and you primarily are reading studies based upon petri dishes in a cell, or cells in a petri dish, and animal studies, it's just so easy to get duped. And I've tried to explain that to friends over and over and over again. So if you're going to do your own research, which is totally fine, lean towards meta-analyses and systemic reviews. And then randomized control has its place as well. But that's the hierarchy of where you want to focus, because when you start getting into those more other places, you read the conclusion, but then it's like, well, this is based upon rats in dosaging that's not seen in humans. And then you're like, oh, it must be true. And it's because you're just unaware of this information.
And that's a nice overview. And think that's like just scratching the surface of what you learn in a biology degree in college. I mean,
can we talk about p-values?
No.
About R-naughts?
No, no one's going to keep listening.
Come on, guys. You guys want to learn how to get a p-value and how to see?
David's being very nerdy, but we're going to cut him off.
All right, I'm cut off.
Good overview. I liked that. All right, so common traps that you can fall into. What you got?
Algorithmic adrenaline is a big one, where one of the common traps people fall into is, it's what was spoken earlier. It's this, if it's spoken about a lot on your social media, it must be true. And so be careful getting caught up in, just because something is said a lot on the internet does not mean it's true. So the trap is, if they just talk about seed oils again and again and again and again and again,
you're going to get fed that over and
over again. And so be careful getting caught up in this idea that just because your algorithm says something consistently doesn't mean it's actually true.
Just remember nuance, people. It is important. All right, and then another trap is echoes versus evidence. That there's these, I learned this word from you, echo chambers.
Yeah, that's so wild. That's...
No,
I'm a
never.
Social media guy.
Yeah, I didn't use that term until I met you. Oh, thank you for opening my knowledge. But there are echo chambers that, because we choose like-minded sources, and then going back to the algorithms, that just starts amplifying that.
And then you see it again and again through your echo chamber, and you think it's true, and it's not. So be very careful that just because your social media reaffirms something does not mean it's true.
I think everyone talks about the algorithm, and they all know it, but I don't think they're thinking about it.
Am I being trapped on the wrong side of the internet?
Because let me just say, your algorithm is very different than my algorithm.
Her algorithm is puppies and recipes.
There are recipes and puppies, but I would say that's not the main. David's always like...
Fit talk.
And who?
Fitness. Fit
talk.
talk.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. But you're always bringing up topics on like weight loss. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that. So
that's my algorithm. Different.
And that you have to realize that we're all seeing different things, right?
And then final trap, competence versus outpaces competence, meaning goes back to my earlier point. Just because someone says something with authority on the internet does not mean it's true. And just because someone speaks more uncertain on a subject does not mean they don't know what they're talking about, because the true professionals will rarely speak in absolutes because they're going based upon what we know thus far. I had a friend of mine not too long ago. He brought up like he just had like I have plenty of friends that do this. They have this resistance on aspartame. And it's like, guys, it's a nothing burger. And then I portray to him, he's like, well, where's the clinical research at? I was like, dude, based upon all the clinical research we have right now, the general consensus is you should max out aspartame consumption in 50 milligrams per kilogram body weight. Okay. So to put that in perspective, that equivalent to me is about 40 cans of Diet Coke a day. So anything less than 40 cans a day, there's been no real evidence to suggest it's bad for you. And they just can't handle it. And I'm just like, that's just where the data's at, man. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, if we find a new study design in humans or that challenges that point, I'm all ears. It doesn't exist. So it's so funny to me that like it's like anytime you go higher than that or lower than that, it just turns into a nothing burger. So I just wouldn't be overly concerned about it. And when you come up with just where the clinical data is at and you say it in that tone, they're like, it can't be true. I'm like, well, if you find something, fine. But like that's just your bias talking. It's not I did my own research. It's just you don't feel like that's a right play, which it's just data. I don't know what you want to tell you. Yeah.
All right. Anything else before we have our takeaways?
Takeaways. Break it down.
So, okay. We came up with a 6-step checklist, which I think is pretty good. So
Turned out pretty well.
When you're looking at research or a topic that you've heard about on social media, do this checklist with yourself. So 1, start with the consensus, not a clip. So think, okay, this was one clip. Is this repeated in other areas of the internet? Because that's probably where you're going to be doing the research. Then number 2, read laterally first. So then start looking at those other lateral sources and see what they say. Number 3 is then weigh the evidence versus is it a lot of evidence or is it a one-off study? And this goes kind of back to what you were talking about with the different study designs. Are we looking at a meta-analysis and a systematic review or just a one-time study with 7 people? Because that's not super high yield.
Truth.
And then number 4, watch incentives. We didn't really dive into this much, but is someone getting paid to promote this specific research?
Mm-hmm.
So that could be probably a whole podcast in and of itself. 5, beware of repetition. So I think if you're seeing this repetition on social media, just be aware that just because it's over and over again on Instagram or TikTok does not mean it to be true.
Truth.
And finally, 6, I think this is what you were kind of getting at, and I think it's very important. Name your biases. Just realize you have biases too, and keep humility. I think if we could all be a little more humble, life would be better.
Very true. This is a great episode.
Absolutely.
Well, hopefully you guys learned something about doing your own research. It has its place. Yeah, do it with humility and learn how to read research before you just read research, because you get duped. I've been duped plenty of times.
Bye.
Toodles.